My name is Frank Fletcher, Manager of Project Management at MLGW, and I'd like to welcome you all to the second Power Supply Advisory Team meeting. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. From a safety perspective, we have two exits here, one to my right, one to my left. If it's an emergency situation, we can exit through these doors. We have armed security inside of the gymnasium if we need to shelter in place. So we'll make sure the officers will let us know if we need to do that. There's an AED that I will be responsible for retrieving if it's in a medical emergency. So I want to make sure we cover that. Also, just from a housekeeping standpoint, if you could put your phones on silent at this time or vibrate. Also, during the Power Supply Advisory Team meeting, there will be a lot of conversation and dialogue going along with the members of the PSAT committee. Please, public, we will take no questions during this time. The conversation, again, will be restricted to the PSAT members. From a housekeeping standpoint, we're going to break for a working lunch around about 11:15. It will probably be somewhere in the middle of TJ's presentation, but during a good transition point, we'll break around 11:15, go get lunch, come back to your table, and we'll continue to work. One thing we want to do is get you out of here at 1 o'clock. We'll hopefully get out early, but we will not keep you past 1 o'clock. Okay? Okay, if there's nothing else, President Young, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Frank. I want to say thank you to those of you who are here today, those PSAT members, as well as those who are visiting. Thank you all for being here. So since we did have the first meeting, and I know some of you worked here for the first meeting, I'd like to go ahead and just do this one more time. We're going to go around the PSAT table and just do introductions. I will say that there's 3 microphones set up on the table for the members of the committee, and when you do need to speak, I would ask, just so that everyone can hear, that you pass the microphone down. There should be plenty of cord to allow that to happen, so if you need to speak, please feel free to pass that down. So again, thank everyone for being here, and let's do this. Let's start over here, and we'll introduce folks and go around just to make sure everybody knows who's here.
Good morning, I'm Jim West. I'm the Vice President and Chief Customer Officer at Memphis Light, Gas, and Water.
My name is Dwayne Twinkletter. I'm a non-voting member of the Board of Commissioners for MLGW.
Good morning, I'm March Avius Jones, Memphis City Council Super District 8, Position 3.
Hi, I'm Dennis Lynch. I'm with the Sierra Club.
Good morning, I'm Bunk Mills. I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Germantown.
George Barnes, retired President of Buchhorn Horn Incorporated, consultant engineers and planners, and civil engineer.
Doug McGowan, Chief Operating Officer for the City of Memphis.
Richard Kelly, Vice President, Corporate Facilities Management at Memphis Lamar Healthcare.
Linda Williams, Roselle Ansdale, Area Association, and the Neighborhood Advisory Council, MLGW.
Mike Pullman, President, CEO of Pickering Firm, and also board member for MLGW.
Gina Stewart, Senior Pastor of Christ Missionary Baptist Church, and also a member of the National Board of the NAACP.
Linda Williams with the Rice Foundation Neighborhood Council.
Randy Richardson, Executive Director of the Memphis Shelby County Port Commission and First Vice President of the EDGE.
Sally Hines, CEO at MIFA, the Metropolitan Interfaith Association.
Sandra Upchurch, Energy Justice Manager, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, NAACP Environmental Justice Chair in national and regional capacities.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, for those intros, and thank you for those of you who are here today. You heard Frank talk a little bit about the schedule today. I want to make sure, if you want to reach out and acknowledge that we also have, where is Councilwoman Robinson? Did she leave? Oh, there she is. Okay, I want to recognize Councilwoman Robinson, Patrice Robinson, in whose district we are now for this meeting. So thank you for allowing us to be here, and to the folks here at the Whitehaven Community Center, I want to thank you for allowing us to gather here today. Who else? Where is, oh, you're at it. Okay, Councilman Morgan back there as well. Thank you for being here, sir. Glad to have you. And any other folks, council, commissioners, anybody? Okay. Worth, yeah, we just mentioned Worth, yeah. All right, so let me do this real quick again because a few of you weren't here last time. I want to introduce some of the executives. We talked about the structure of this, and we talked about some of the sub-teams that will be working as well in conjunction with this team, and I want to make sure that everybody knows who's heading those teams up. And so some of you met last time Cheryl Patterson, who is our General Counsel, Vice President General Counsel. Dana Jeans is our Senior Vice President, Chief Accounting Officer, and CFO. Alonzo Weaver, you all know, he's our Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, is not with us today. And many of you probably know Gail Carson. She will be heading up one of those teams as well. She's our Vice President of Community and External Affairs. And so I want to make sure that everybody knows who those folks are. And again, thank you all for being here. So if you looked at the agenda, you'll see today predominantly, as we talked about last time, we have folks from TVA here. We'll introduce them in just a minute. And they're going to talk a little bit about current state and some of their outlook. And we'll give them the opportunity to do that here in just a minute. And so we'll talk about that. And but before we do that, I just want to again recap for us as well as for those who may not have been able to be here last time, a little bit about what we talked about in our very, very first meeting. We talked about the MLGW mission, right? And we wanted to make sure we framed the conversation and our purpose around that. And it's to safely deliver services that create and sustain superior customer experiences. Our main objective as we go through all of the things that we do has to be framed around the fact that we are here, even this process is here and is designed with our customers ultimately in mind, right? So we tried to make sure we brought together folks who were stakeholders around this community, but we also want to make sure that we are focused clearly on our mission as we go through this. We talk about our vision, and that's to be the trusted provider of exceptional customer value in the communities that we're privileged to serve. There is a community component, a huge community component to this process. That is why we are trying to move these meetings around, number one, and also that's why we wanted to make sure that we had a diverse representation on this team to help us with the input that we need as we go through this process. And then the last thing I'll mention is we talk about the values that undergird all of the things that we do. We call it the MLGW way. It starts with safety. It has to do with integrity, ownership, inclusion, and compassionate service. We call that the MLGW way, and those values will be what helps to drive us, and we'll make sure that we can keep ourselves aligned with these values as we go through this entire process. So these 5 elements make up the values that we call the MLGW way, and will certainly be key as we move forward through our process of the integrated resource planning and evaluation. I want to reiterate why we're here, just again as a refresher, as a reminder. We covered this last time, but I want to cover it one more time. This team, essentially, you're here to provide input regarding what we consider to be the optimal power electricity supply options that meets the needs that MLGW customers have for reliable energy. This is not the ultimate decision group. We do know that ultimately, if there's a decision to do something different, of course, that will run through our board and through the city council, through our process that we talked about, our governance process that we talked about last time. But this is a key element into that process. And we really, really want to make sure that this is an engaged body, because without this input and without your participation, we won't be able to maximize or optimize that ultimate recommendation. We want to identify, we talked about this, the least cost, not necessarily the lowest cost, and there's a reason and there's a distinction between the two. We have talked about the fact that when you look at the way in which we could arrange resources and have resources to supply electricity for our customers, you want to make sure that you've got the optimal arrangement and the least cost option around that optimal arrangement that considers all of the input and all of the things that really matter to all stakeholders, including our customers and those that you represent. So we're looking for that. That needs to be a reliable source. That needs to make sure that it considers environmental concerns. It needs to consider safety and all the things that we talked about earlier. So that's also a piece of that. And the preferred supply arrangement, we talked about that as judged to be the most cost-effective resource mix after we consider all the risks, as we consider the supply reliability and the uncertainty and the government and energy resource policies. There are a number, and these will become more evident as we go through this process, but there are a number of considerations that may not necessarily have an explicit price tag associated with it that we need to actually make sure we factor in to this decision. And so we want to make sure that we consider those things as we go through this process as well. So specifically as it pertains to you, again, we talked about this, you all are giving us some critical input into this planning process from diverse, collaborative, diverse points of view. We want to make sure that you all help us consider various factors that's necessary so that we can reach this long-term optimal power supply solution. This, as we know, is a long-term decision, at least 20 plus years out that we have to think about, and the ramifications of that are significant, will be significant when it comes to investment, when it comes to reliability and so forth, so that's important. And again, as I talked about earlier, this team input will certainly be critical to the recommendation. So with that, I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of a refresher, and I want to take just a few minutes before we transition to the TVA folks to have let there be any questions from the team, comments, thoughts since we met last that may be left over that we didn't either get to or that maybe we didn't consider. We did have one more join. Want to introduce yourself just to make sure we've got some new people here. Tell us who you are. And, yeah.
Harold Bird, President of Bank of Barley, but representing the Shelby County Chamber of Mines, which is the Chambers of Commerce of Arlington, Barley, Cardinal, Lakeland, Millington, Germantown.
Thank you. And as a reminder, electrically, MLGW serves all of Shelby County. We wanted to make sure we had such representation among this committee, and so that's very, very important. Thanks, Harold, for being here.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so, no problem. Glad you're here. So with that, I'll open the floor again. Any thoughts, questions, anything that we need to clarify before we move forward, or any other questions? Excellent. All right, well, so today, as you can see from the agenda, we have representatives here from TVA, and I'm going to actually turn this over now to the president and CEO. We're glad you're here. Jeff, thank you for being here. Jeff Lyash, who is the now, 6 weeks, 5 weeks? 5 weeks. And I can relate how that, I know how that, I'm still trying to tell people I'm new here. But Jeff is here and his team, and I want to introduce Jeff Lyash to you, the new CEO for TVA. Jeff's going to come up and talk a little bit about TVA, and then we're going to have John Thomas come up and go through a presentation to help us kind of understand some of the current state issues associated with TVA, and just in full disclosure, so everyone's aware, so no one feels awkward. We've had very candid conversations with TVA regarding the purpose of this, our intention, the fact that we're out of the gate now, we're going to run this to completion, we're going to make the best decision. TVA has been very supportive in this process. So I want you all to know that's why we're grateful that they're here, that's why we asked them to come. We appreciate their support and their objectivity as we go through this process over the next several months. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Lyash.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. As JP said, my name is Jeff Lyash. I'm the President and CEO of the Tennessee Valley Authority. This is week 5 for me. So I am new to TVA and I am new to Memphis. But my wife Tracy and I were really excited about being here. I come to TVA from being the CEO of Ontario Power Generation, which, like TVA, is one of the largest public power entities in the U.S. And so I understand investor-owned utilities. I also understand public power, which I have great admiration for. It's a big part of the reason why I chose to come here to TVA. I think the mission of institutions like this is just so important. My wife Tracy and I are also glad to be back in the South. I've a 35-plus year career in the power industry, an industry I feel really passionately about, with a range of companies here in the U.S. And although we were born and raised in Pennsylvania, we lived most of our married life, and I worked most of my career here in the Southeast U.S. As a matter of fact, my children and my 9 grandkids are right next door to Tennessee here in North Carolina. So that's just a little bit of a fringe benefit of getting back down here to this part of the country that we love so much. As JT said, we at TVA, and I personally, are committed to helping you through this process. I think it's an important process. I think it's the right process. This is a critical decision for the community of Memphis, for MLGW, and you need to make the right decision for Memphis. And that's what TVA wants you to do. And so we want to help you through this process any way we can in order to get all the information and have you make a good decision. Of course, I'll say it maybe a half a dozen times, maybe more through the presentation. At the end of this, we'd love to be your supplier. Memphis is important to us, and that's where I'd like this to end. But just as important is to help you as you do what is admittedly a very difficult task. So, and I've also got to say that I recognize even before taking the role at TVA what an important customer Memphis is, and how important it is for you to get to the right resolution. As a matter of fact, before I took the job, the team told me that I recognized Memphis, the importance of Memphis. The team told me that they were hosting a delegation from MLGW and City Council at our System Ops Center and our River Ops Center and some other places. And I came down from Toronto to get to know some of the folks and begin to understand the issues. And actually, this is my third trip to Memphis in my first 5 weeks. Because what I'm attempting to do is listen and make sure I understand all the facets of the issue. And so we'll go through a presentation here, but I want to make sure you feel free to stop me and ask questions. I don't want this to be a lecture. I'd like to be a dialogue. Don't hesitate if there's something you don't understand, something you don't agree with. Please ask me and I'll try to clarify it. I'm going to kick this off. I'm going to turn it over to John Thomas, who is our Chief Financial Officer, to give you a picture, an additional level, a picture of TVA and our relationship. And then we'll try to leave plenty of time in the end for questions. So to begin with, these are the topics I want to cover. I want to talk about Memphis and TVA and that relationship. I think it's important to make sure we talk about the value of the Valley public power model. This is the TVA public power model. That's the power of what exists here. It's unique in the country, maybe unique in the world, in that this entire Tennessee Valley is based on a public power model that involves TVA, partnerships with local power companies like MLGW, and with communities like Memphis and stakeholders to try to deliver what's best for the citizens of the Valley without having to have regard for investors who have a different set of objectives oftentimes. And I think that's what we're talking about. A bit about the TVA mission, and then I'll turn it over to John to talk about the value of an integrated system, because that's what TVA brings. Another unique aspect, so that you can have that as you compare to alternatives. And then a bit more about partnering for the future. So that's the agenda that I'd like to work through. Okay. So, let's see. Let me adjust the picture there a little bit. There you go. There you go. Thank you. So, I want to begin by telling you that TVA is committed to Memphis. We have been for 80 years, and I'd like to see TVA and Memphis have a partnership that lasts for another 80 years. And again, we appreciate what you're doing here today and want to be as supportive as possible. And that's part of what I'm here today to tell you. So let's talk a bit about Memphis and TVA. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt signing the TVA Act in 1933. So TVA is 86 years old right now. And in our 86-year history, 80 of that has been in partnership with Memphis. And as a matter of fact, when you look at this picture, standing just behind Franklin Roosevelt is Senator McKellar from Memphis, who was there at the signing of the TVA Act in 1933. And in signing the act, Franklin Roosevelt, the quote has scrolled a bit off the screen there, but one of the things Franklin Roosevelt said was, power is really a secondary matter. TVA is primarily intended to change and to improve the standards of living of the people of the valley. This was TVA's mission at the outset, and it's still TVA's mission today. From the beginning, TVA is chartered to focus on three things, and I'll cover these a little later. Energy, delivering energy to people of the valley, and giving them access at the lowest feasible price. The environment, being good stewards of the environment here in the valley. And economic development, helping grow the economy, jobs, so that we can improve people's quality of life, and attempting to do that equitably across the whole spectrum. This is TVA's mission, and I think it was an experiment at the time. Roosevelt said what he wanted was a different type of government entity, one vested with the power of government, but possessed of the flexibility and innovation of private industry. Best of both. So just to talk a bit about the first of those, energy. TVA delivers power here in the valley, and we do it at some of the lowest prices of utilities in the country. And while we're accomplishing those other two objectives. So these are our rates over the last decade. And the point here is we've held our rates flat for a decade. When you think about base rates plus the cost of fuel, the two major components. You can see the base rate has risen a bit as we've made investments. Investments like finishing Watts-Marr Unit 2 of the nuclear site, upgrading Browns Ferry, which we just finished another of our nuclear plants, which increased the output of those plants by almost another half of the nuclear unit. Gas-fired combined cycle like the Allen plant here in Memphis. We made those investments to set this system up for the long term, for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And in doing that, we were able to hold rates flat because we've lowered the fuel consumption, the fuel cost, if you will, through those investments. And a byproduct of this is we've been able to shrink our environmental impact as well. I'll touch on that at the end. And my objective now, looking forward 10 years, is to repeat this picture. So the investments that we've made, my assessment is that they are strong enough that this should put TVA in a position of maintaining relatively stable rates over the next decade as we take that investment and get full use out of it. And so if I come here 10 years from now, what I hope to be able to show you is a graph that continues to show these flat rates. And I might say that in that rate, one thing that I think John will talk a little bit about is what stands behind that is an integrated delivery, which means it's not just energy, the lumens coming out of the light. It's capacity, reliability, operating services, which ensures that the light comes on when you throw the switch. All of that comes within that rate. These are very different products in different markets, maybe priced very differently. For TVA, it's an all-in proposition. We also value the partnership. So, and I must admit, as I look historically, TVA as a partner with Memphis, we have not always lived up to our or your expectations. So my assessment is that we deliver a lot of value, but I think there's a lot more value we can deliver to Memphis, and we, TVA, has not always lived up to that expectation. And so I would just share with you, one of my objectives is to correct that. So, what do I mean when I say over 70 million in annual benefits? Well, a few examples of this. The city receives from TVA about 17 million a year, what's called payment in lieu of taxes. About $50 million a year in economic development incentives. I'll talk more about economic development, but part of our mission, and it's a piece of our mission that you will find no one else has, is to help Memphis develop economically, add jobs, attract capital investment, and we incentivize that with about a $50 million a year investment. We do about $2.2 million in community efficiency projects like home winterization. This is an area I feel particularly strongly about. I think investments that can help those with lower income help to reduce their power bill and live more efficiently are very important investments. My experience is they have a good payback. I'm really proud of the fact that we support that. And about $200,000 of funds that go directly into the community to benefit schools and other community organizations. It's a part of TVA's economic development program. It's a part of what we do around our energy products. So TVA's value for you should go well beyond the kilowatt hour. You know, these are just some examples consistent with our mission to create jobs and to bring in capital investment. We partner with MLGW and with local industries in order to execute on that. And what I would stress is we partner, because this cannot happen with TVA alone focused on this. It has to have JT and his team really partnering with us, as well as the local community industry, to make sure our investments are the right investments, and these are some of them. And one of the things JT, don't listen to this part. One of the things I must congratulate you on is, having been around the industry for 3 decades, you have hired an individual lead MLGW that has the respect of his peers across the industry, myself included. So you've already made a good decision in your choice here. So when we partner for economic development, that second E, you know, what does that look like? So here are some of the tools we use, and I'm not going to go through a lot of detail. You can study the numbers if you like. But one of the things TVA brings is a world-class economic development organization. And I can say that not as the TVA CEO, but as someone who was a competitor with TVA over the last 30 years for attracting economic development. When I was in Canada, I went head-to-head with TVA, and I was 0 for 2 on attracting industry. And similarly with Duke and with Carolina Power and Light next door, this is a world-class economic development organization. And these are some of the tools: investment credits. We set performance goals so that as companies add jobs and make capital investments, they can be rewarded. We have a loan program. We do a lot of investment preparation, development of mega sites, and certify them so that it attracts industry. Just some of the things we do with economic development that I think are important. Here is an area that I would like to see us do better and more. The individual, if you don't know who runs this for us, you need to get to know. He needs to get to know. He was John Bradley. And I mean, John is a native of Memphis. Grew up, I think, in the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations here. Really an outstanding individual. Runs one of the best economic development organizations in the country. And we need to focus on doing more here. And did you have a question?
I did. All of that's wonderful, but I'm curious. You know that David Apple does specifically for measures?
Yes, we can.
You did say you are not doing.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
And that's not like to see that I can get that information from you or John Bradley.
We will get to, incidentally, Mark, if y'all have met Mark Creech, Mark raise your hand. Mark is our director here on the ground in Memphis. And so we can get you some information on the scope of our economic development activities and what they've produced. Let me, it would be, how do I scroll this up, Vic? Okay, there you go. That's good. So, in partial answer to your question, here are some examples. You know, we have, since 2012, basically attracted 24 new location projects and 63 expansion projects here in Memphis. So, you can get an idea of these, Indigo, St. Jude's Children's Hospital, et cetera. And so we can provide you the details of how we do this. And I think we've done a good job for Memphis. My comment is just, I think we can do better. And how we do better depends on how effectively we partner. Here is a great example of partnership, I think, of a different sort. Memphis, MLGW, and PBA. You all know we invested about $1 billion retiring the Allen plant and building a gas-fired combined cycle plant. You may not realize it, but the technology in this gas-fired combined cycle plant, these GDH class turbines, this is the most efficient technology in existence. So this is really state-of-the-art here in Memphis, and this is part of what I showed you earlier, our investment that lowers fuel costs, lowers emissions. This is a significant piece of that investment. And that plant, in addition to being critical for TBA and getting a generation source right in Memphis, which is an important reliability piece, also sets what is essentially MLGW's, I think, biggest water and gas customer. So it's just another example of partnership. About $200 million worth of water and gas is what's input to that facility. Yes.
You know that your former coal-burning power plant left a lot of fly ash on the ground, and that's polluting or potentially a risk for aquifer, which gives us the best water in the country. You're taking an awfully long time to develop a plan to clean the fly ash. Could you accelerate that?
Yes. So did everybody hear the question? Yeah. So the question is, we got a lot of fly ash at the Allen site, and how are we thinking about it? So let me go ahead and address that. This is an important issue, and actually, it's one of the very first issues as the new CEO that I looked at. Coal combustion residuals, coal ash in general, and the Allen plant very specifically. So if I might just take a few minutes to address this. These coal plants that the country built over the last 50 or 80 years were the workhorses of electrifying our country, building our economy, and giving us some of the quality of life we have today. But we have a problem we have to deal with, and that's the coal combustion residuals, coal ash. This is the deferred cost of 80 years of using this as a power source. And at the front end, one of the things I would tell you is, I am personally committed, and TBA is and will be committed to addressing that coal ash issue at Allen in the best way, in a responsible way, and with the right level of transparency and oversight, and on the shortest appropriate timeline. And I would further say that that commitment is not related to whether you're a TBA customer or not. I hope you're a TBA customer, but we're going to do this regardless, because this is what should be expected of a company like TBA. It's a national issue. It's also a TBA issue in our region, but I also recognize it as a Memphis issue, because that plant is not just somewhere, it's here. And so, my view is we have to participate in the national effort to address this issue. We have to engage with the EPA and PDEC and regulators at a state level. And in making our decisions and in going down this path, we have to engage locally. You should understand what we're doing there. You should understand the decisions we're making. And you should have input to those decisions, and we should be transparent. So I'm going to get to your specific question. This is important, so if you don't mind me taking a few minutes. One of the things and TBA, by the way, has a history of taking responsibility for this, even as it's a controversial topic and it generates lots of disparate views. I think the company already feels this way. My job is to emphasize it and make sure it happens. One of the first things I did was pull a very capable executive out of the organization, reporting directly to me, Joe Hoagland, and his entire job is making sure we are effectively resolving the coal combustion residuals project. At Allen, at Kingston, and making sure we have a coherent program. One of the things I asked Joe to do was to make sure that we establish the right level of transparency and local dialogue in this process that it will do. And so we're in the process of doing that now. We're collecting data, we're looking at the science. Now, with respect to the Allen plant, I've spent some time looking at the data, looking at the issue. And what I would say is, with respect to groundwater, you all know we have some indications of groundwater contamination in the alluvial aquifer. This is not impactful on the Memphis Sands aquifer, and we're very confident that it won't impact the Memphis Sands aquifer, but that relies on us doing all the right things. And so we are developing now our plans for mitigating that alluvial aquifer groundwater contamination so that it never can get threatened to the Memphis Sands. A big part of that is going to be dewatering the ash ponds, putting in a mitigation process to clean up that contamination in the alluvial aquifer, and then ultimately dispositioning the coal ash. Our preferred approach on that coal ash right now is to excavate it and dispose of it in the line landfill. I say preferred because we are going through the permitting process and the environmental analysis in order to support that. So I can't conclude on something that I have to work through with the regulators, but that's the path we're on. What I expect is this summer we will begin to dewater those ash ponds. When you dewater the ash pond, you remove sort of the forcing function and any contamination for which that might be the source. Now you've alleviated it. And it takes a period of time to dewater, and then we will begin mitigating any groundwater contamination. And that in parallel with the process of permitting, siting, and decision making. And we won't drag our feet on this. For balance, I must say that you should never rush to do these things either, because you can make mistakes that are worse environmentally by moving too quickly. And so we will move at a pace that's consistently running a world-class effort to address the issue. We won't delay intentionally. We'll let the right way to do the project pace together. Is that? It's probably more than you wanted.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry for the group for the diversion.
It's important.
Environment is one of your three key priorities.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's important, so I appreciate you asking the question. And if any of you would like to talk afterwards about it, I'm happy to do that as well. Okay, let me talk a bit about the Valley Public Power Model, because in large part it's why I'm here. I think this Valley Public Power Model, this partnership between TVA, LPCs, and local communities, is a strategic advantage for the Tennessee Valley for the next 2 decades. What you have here in this model has preserved something that, in my view, has largely been lost in other sectors of the industry that have fragmented that value chain, fragmented those relationships, and put return on investment in a place that it may not be helpful in solving the problems that we face. And the problems that we face are continuing to maintain prices affordable for people so they can afford it, keep the region economically competitive so we can increase quality of life, and consistently reduce our environmental footprint so that we're a part of the solution for environmental issues that we all face and not part of the problem. And I think the Tennessee Valley here has got a model that I think will be very, very effective over the coming years. And I've already talked about our 3 elements that we mentioned: energy, the environment, and economic development. This is where I spend my time. Just a few quick facts on TVA, because one of the things I'm finding, and not necessarily true here in Memphis, but I just find it across the system, is that our customers, in a certain sense, have kind of lost touch with what TVA is and what it does. At one point, as Tennessee Valley Authority was electrifying this region, I think they were very in touch with it. But business has gotten very complicated. It's gotten very large, and so it's worth reflecting. And so this is just some of the quick facts. TVA is one of the largest utilities in the country. We serve 154 local power companies. Memphis is one of those. You're also our largest customer. So you represent about 10% of our revenue. We serve industrial customers directly. We need service from transmission. Big service territory, 38,000 megawatt generating fleet, 16,000 miles of transmission here. And so I won't bore you with, I'm an engineer, I can bore you to death with statistics. And so the importance of this for me is that as you think about the choices you want to make, you need to consider what stands behind the product you're buying. Because it's a business, and I'll try to illustrate it, where scale and diversity in the portfolio and reliability of the delivery mechanism from wherever the generation is coming from to the point of delivery for JT and his team, these things matter a lot. And oftentimes people don't recognize it when they don't have them. And they have economic impact or they can attract business. So keep it in mind. TVA is substantial. I mentioned the transmission system. I'm going to talk a little bit about generation, but that 16,000-mile transmission system is arguably the most reliable, most robust transmission system in North America. And I've run a few of these, so I'm fairly familiar. This is a pretty remarkable system, and it has the capacity to reliably deliver and back up a lot of change over time. Now, transmission reliability isn't everything, so I know you all are struggling. JT's struggling with some reliability issues here that I'm very confident he's going to get to. As a matter of fact, I had offered to take if there's any way TVA can help with that, we'd be glad to do it. But in terms of transmission, extremely reliable system. The power portfolio also is, I think, strong and moving in the right direction. So very, scroll up on that a little bit more. So if you look back to 2007, you can see where TVA got its power. About 26% nuclear, over half, 58% from coal, some gas and some hydro. As we sit here today, what you can see is we have significantly increased our nuclear capacity and the energy from that. We have increased our gas capacity by building a state-of-the-art gas-fired combined cycle plant. We have increased our hydro by optimizing the existing hydro assets and begun to implement a process of adding wind and solar to this portfolio. And in the process, we have shrunk the contribution from coal to 20%. Here's the importance of that. This is really a remarkable generation portfolio. If you take the nuclear and the hydro, today, almost 55% of the energy that we generate has zero or very low fuel cost, hydro and nuclear. And it also has zero greenhouse gas emissions. So the reason that's important is that is a hedge against fuel price volatility in the future and against greenhouse gas emissions and the ultimate price that will have to be paid for carbon emissions. Puts us in a position then with the coal and the gas that we can have the flexibility if there's added pressure on coal and we need to retire more, we can dispatch the gas more aggressively. If gas prices spike, we have coal as a hedge. So this portfolio diversification I think is important. If I roll forward to 2028, what our RFP says is we will continue to increase the slice of the pie from nuclear, we will continue to decrease coal, and we will increase wind and solar contribution. Directionally, that's the way we will go. we might see more wind and solar penetration. And if so, that will come at the cost of coal. And that will depend on if pricing continues to fall, because we do least cost planning. So our objective is get our carbon footprint down, deploy wind and solar, but be careful not to do it at a cost to our customers that they can't afford. Yes, ma'am?
Will that affect Memphis, that increase in wind and solar, planning some solar farms in the Memphis area?
Yes, yeah, as a matter of fact, we right now have about 1,500 megawatts of solar on the system. I see that tripling over the next number of years. We have solar panels at our Allen site. We just commissioned, within the last couple of weeks, the largest solar facility in Tennessee is here at Millington, in partnership with the U.S. Navy and Memphis.
Millington's not Memphis?
Yeah.
Memphis?
Yes, I understand. And we'd be glad to work with Memphis if that's a priority for you on developing solar. Here, you have an opportunity because of your load shape here that solar can have a good, strong case on that. Okay. So, and so the net result of this, if you take a look at it, is flat rates, a diverse generation mix that hedges risk in the future. And in doing that, we've reduced over the last decade or so our greenhouse gas emissions by 55%. As I looked at TVA and thought about joining it, this was one of the most impressive things to me, and probably the least well known. I don't believe that there's another utility in the U.S. who's made this sort of progress on reducing its greenhouse gas footprint without substantially increasing price. Now, I would also tell you I don't think this is enough. We need to continue this trend, and we need to continue to look for ways to do it without burdening the customer with the cost. So from a big picture point of view, this really is the benefit of the Valley Public Power Model. Energy and capacity, and energy and a capacity that reduces risk for Memphis and our customers in the long term. That's an important concept I would ask you to consider, because any decision you're going to make, you may or may not understand the real risks and consequences. They won't materialize for perhaps a decade. These are long-term decisions. And so think about any decision you're making against the whole range of possible futures that might occur. It's one of the, I'll confess, it's one of the things TVA delivers because of our size, because of the diversity of the generation portfolio, because of the transmission system, and because we're public power. So I'm going to turn this over to John Thomas, and he's going to get a little more into the financial plan, some of the basis for what we think rates looks like in the long term, and some of the other details about how the system operates. But before I do, let me stop there and see if there's any questions for me. I'll come up again at the end, or anything you want to hear me address that you haven't heard me touch on already.
Yes, sir. I think it might be helpful if you explained a little bit about how the network is interconnected across the grid from nuclear to coal to all these places. Because even I was under the misimpression a number of years ago that if we had a power plant in Memphis, it only supplied Memphis. But in actuality, after I visited a grid location, I found out that the entire system feeds into the grid supplies across the network. So.
Yeah, this is an important notion. The system here in the Tennessee Valley was built to serve a very large footprint, and so as a community, your power isn't coming from Allen. Your power is coming from 38,000 megawatts across a large geographic area, multiple fuel sources, and it's being delivered to you through 16,000 miles of transmission system. That is all controlled out of our River Operations Center in Knoxville, which is controlling river flows and dispatching that hydro resource and making sure there's cooling water for various generating stations. and from our System Operations Center in Chattanooga, which is managing that huge machine to deliver exactly the amount of power that you're consuming every second of every day. And from our trading floor, where we look at all of the other providers that are interconnected with the Tennessee Valley. And if their markets are providing a lower cost of energy at any particular point in time than TVA can provide, we buy it from them, import it to the system, and put it in this mix. So if you think of our neighbors, PJM, MISO, we trade with them on an ongoing basis. Now, TVA's power prices are very low, and so the amount of power we buy from others varies. But for example, with the Midwest MISO last year, we bought 0.04% of our power from MISO. And what that means is 0.04% of the time, MISO's price was lower than TVA's price. And so we strike on that. I would encourage you, and the importance of this is that you don't want to hang on a single generator. If I was here telling you that I could sell you a power plant, one spinning generator, and you should bet your energy future on it, you should show me the way out of town. Because any single plant, any single transmission line that you're relying on means if you lose that line, if you lose that generator, if their cost goes up, you are bearing all the risk of that. Here, we can manage this big portfolio to take that risk off of you. And that's kind of the way the system works. I would suggest, and I would invite you, that it would be really beneficial for you, and we'd be happy to host you. Some of you have already come to our System Ops Center and our trading floor, our River Ops Center, and we can give you Power System 101. It's the kind of information that will be useful to you no matter what you're looking at, because it'll show you how the pieces fit. Is that the one?
Yeah, I think it was just important to point out that, if you put a solar facility in Millington or somewhere around here, it still benefits the business area as well as power.
It does. And really, if you put to the earlier point, if you built a utility scale solar facility here in Memphis, that would certainly benefit Memphis, but it's really benefiting customers of TVA. Just as anything we do, if we built a solar facility somewhere else, it's still benefiting Memphis because it ties into the grid. It may not be visible, but it does.
You talked about jobs and investments. Do you have any metrics on the number of employees y'all have in Shelby County?
So I'll give you a general number. I don't have the specifics, but if I think about our staff here in Memphis, as well as our TVA employees and the permanent contractors that we have at the Allen plant, it's roughly about 100.
Does the Millington facility, the solar project there, currently have storage capabilities to feed into your system?
It feeds into our system. Storage is a technology that I think is going to be very important in the long run. Its costs are coming down. It's still a big cost hurdle to make it effective from a price point of view, except in very specific instances. And because TVA has such a diverse portfolio, and actually we have one of the largest storage devices in the world. It's called Raccoon Mountain. Anybody familiar with it? It's a pumped hydro facility in Chattanooga that at night pumps water from the Tennessee River up almost 1,000 feet, stores it in the reservoir, flows it back down at night. So TVA right now has some of the largest storage in the world, and we use it every day. I think some other storage technologies like batteries, the price come down, may augment that, and they may be able to do it dispersed instead of centralized.
I have another question. If you're selling reliability as opposed to price competition with a cycle side, what is the premium that we should add to our price for the reliability?
That's a really good question, and I'm not going to be able to give you a number, but let me suggest what you might think about it. So, one of the things I would hope is that TVA is competitive with MISO on price, even ignoring the reliability question. I think you'll find that. We'll see. I think you'll find that. Reliability, you have to think of it in terms of health, safety, and economic development. And so, because if you have a system, and I don't want to pick on any MISO or PGM or anybody, but when you move from being an integrated part of a large system to purchasing power and capacity and services over what will be a narrow transmission corridor, the pipe between the two systems, just by the nature of it, you've increased your risk. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. You have to look at the specific case. And the risk is that if you realize that reliability, this morning MISO is in a conservative operation order. They've got some capacity issues and some transmission issues in MISO South, and so they're in a higher risk position right now. How often are you in that position? Because if you suffer a grid level reliability issue, it affects schools, it affects hospitals, it affects your businesses. I'm not trying to create angst or concern, because the system in the country are all generally reliable, but it's that increment. How much is that worth to you? Probably more directly, you should talk to your industrial customers, economic development customers you're trying to recruit into the area, because for them, reliability will be very valuable. Think of it like this: if I'm a business and I'm going to put a $500 million investment in Memphis, I want to make sure that the reliability, power quality, as well as the price are not only good today, they're going to be good for the life of that asset. Certainty that that's going to be the case. And so one of the major economic development levers that TVA has is we have one of the nation's most reliable power systems, and businesses put a price on that. And so hopefully that's responsive. Those are the types of things you can consider. I can't put a number on it. You'll have to make that judgment.
I have a question. One of the slides indicated that there are 58 directly served companies. How many are there here in Memphis?
Mark, do you have that number? Three.
And what's the criteria for one being directly served by TVA?
Yeah, if you're, and my team will stop me 5 weeks on the job if I get the criteria wrong, but my understanding is if you're part of the TVA system, then TVA can serve a customer directly if their load is larger than 5 megawatts, right? And they're within certain geographic parameters. We don't always serve them just because they're over 5 megawatts, but that's where generally the boundary line is. And we try to work with the local LPCs. In some cases, the LPC doesn't really have the capacity to serve them, plus or minus 5 megawatts. But we don't aggressively try to secure customers from LPCs. We're there to serve the big customers where they need that higher voltage delivery point, where they really need 5 nines of reliability and their load is large, and we drive a lot of capital investment in an LPC. We're happy to serve those, and that's the way we think about it.
Thank you.
In that same light, you say that Memphis is 10% of your revenue. Does that include that direct serve component?
No, I don't believe it does. No.
What was the question?
So let's make sure I got it right. If in the 10% of our revenue that I quoted, does that include the 3 direct serve customers? And the answer is no, it doesn't. That's separate.
Then another comment, the reliability piece. It doesn't matter. All these outages that we've had here, it's not MISO, it's not TVA, it's not any, it's our system. There's a thing that we can do, whether it's borrow free money from TVA or MISO. That fits.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent you have a reliability issue on your system here in Memphis, only you can solve it. It doesn't matter who you buy your power from, you're gonna have to confront that. And what I would offer is, from TDA's point of view, if we can help you with that, we're happy to do that. If we can help you technically, project management, supply chain, if we can get creative about how to help, if you have a significant investment you have to make, about how to finance it, in the relationship between you and us as a customer. You know, we all know you had as I understand, you had a prepaid process that went on for about 15 years. It just expired. That's an example of where Memphis helped TDA, and I think it turned out to be a good thing for Memphis. There may be a way now for TDA to help Memphis. That's good for the both of us. So I don't have anything specific in mind, but I would just put that on the table. We're glad to talk about that.
Hey, one last one.
Go ahead.
One last question. You said there about 100 employees, contractors in Memphis. What's your footprint in Chattanooga?
It's much larger than that.
I know.
We have about 1,800. What's that? About 1,500. And the reason our presence is so big, and most of those folks is our nuclear workforce, because Chattanooga is sort of the geographic center of Browns Ferry, Sequoia, and Watts Bar. So the majority of that 1,500 is our nuclear team.
I have a question about your economic development you're talking about.
Excuse me, will you please use the mic when you ask questions? We can't hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
How much have you allotted for training in Memphis for the nuclear power development, solar power development, and wind power development? And how much is your economic development is a source of training and building up the amount of jobs here locally in Memphis in the energy department?
Yeah, what we tend to focus with our economic development partners where they're trying to locate to the area and they have a need. We're happy to engage in workforce development support. One of the areas we really like to invest in, I can't cite you the number here in Memphis, I can get it for you, but is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, because whether that is the workforce that we and most of these folks are going to need. I just yesterday spent some time with a charter school that was focused on science, technology, engineering, and math that our employees volunteer at, and we provide a little bit of support for. And if there are opportunities like that in Memphis, we should know what they are, and we should be looking to get involved. I feel JT over here, so I think that means it's time for a break.
Maybe one last question. The capacity that GDA has, can you hear me okay? I speak pretty loudly. At least that's one of my better headsets. What percentage does the Memphis area consume of GDA's capacity?
From memory, we're about 38,000 megawatts. And on a peak day, a hot day in the summer, Memphis is probably about 3,000 megawatts of that. Maybe a little more, 3,100. On a day like today or a normal day in the winter, that may be 1,200, 1,300 megawatts. So it varies over the course of the year. This kind of illustrates a point, so think about that. Wherever you buy your power has to be prepared reliably to deliver you 3,100 megawatts on the peak, but only 1,000 to 1,500 on a cool day. Probably less than that night on a cool day.
So less than like 8%, 10%?
Yeah, or less than that. Yeah, that's, okay, well, I'm gonna turn this over to JT. I think we're gonna break, and when we come back, I'll have John Thomas cover the rest, and then I'll stand for some more questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. One of the things that we're going to do, just to kind of give you all a schedule, we're going to go ahead and do the lunch, and as we mentioned, kind of like we did last time, those of you who were here, we'll break. Team members will get their lunches, we'll bring them to the table, and we'll have an opportunity to eat, and John will get started about 15 minutes after that. Let me quickly say one thing to maybe help illustrate something that I think Jeff was alluding to, that I think is really important to understand. We have talked about this a few times, but when it comes to, there's been a few questions around the energy delivery process. And one of the things that I'd like to kind of give as a maybe as an analogy, there is a couple of bridges. I live in the downtown area, so I get to see both the I-55, the M Bridge, and the I-55 bridge, both going over to West Memphis. And one of the things that I often think about is, what if there was only one bridge over there, right? And I say a barge that several of them come up and down the river every day hits one of those bridges and takes it out, right? So if you only have one bridge, you have a challenge now getting over there to Arkansas, right? If you have two bridges, you got an alternative route. It may take a little bit longer. The concept I'm trying to convey, though, is that we have, as we talked about in our first meeting, 4 delivery points today where we take and purchase wholesale power from TVA. We have 4, right? So if we lose one of those 4, we've got the other 3, and we can probably do some things to make sure everyone around the community is indifferent to that. But if you build one line to any other entity, and this is to illustrate the point Jeff made earlier, when, it's not if, but when something happens with that one connection, you're going to probably have some issues. And so there's value in having redundancy. In our business, we call it redundancy. It is built into the networking, and it's a part of what you see in the photo that's in your book and the presentation about how the system is networked. So even inside the fence, not just outside the TVA, but in the MLGW fence, right, when we look at our infrastructure, that's part of what we try to do as well internally, is to make sure that we have significant redundancy. So if we lose a line here, we can backfeed from another location. So that's really a big part of what we have to think about, right, moving forward with whatever we decide to do, is that we have to make sure we maintain the integrity of that, what I call redundancy in the network. So that's part of what you have to keep in mind as we go through the process. So with that, lunch is here. Feel free to take a break and pick that up. We're going to give everybody about 10 or 15 minutes to transition. Once everybody gets settled back again, John will come up and continue through the remainder of the presentation. All right, thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here to talk about 2 things that I want to follow up from what Jeff talked about. And one is to talk about the path that TVA has been on over the last 6 to 7 years. Talk about the success of that plan, and that's the underpinning of the strength, in particular the financial strength, but also the operational strength in the fleet that he talked about. I'll cover that. And then the second thing I thought I'd share with you is some information about IRP processes and IRP model. Well, the TVA, we're just finishing our most recent IRP process. So it took us about 18 months to get that done, but we're in the publishing the report phase of that. But not just IRP planning, because we do that, but we also do power supply plan modeling, the fundamental modeling underneath IRP processes. We do that every single month in terms of planning and balancing the fleet on a real active basis. And a lot of the models that drive this are the same models, actually. But what you see with an IRP is a much more extensive look at what the world might be. So I thought I'd cover those couple of things. Starting with the TVA and the financial strength of TVA. In 2013, TVA put together a 10-year strategic plan. So about the time we had put this plan together, we were getting ready to launch this plan. The president's budget came out and had some language about potentially privatizing TVA. So as a result of that, the Office of Management and Budget, OMB in Washington, wanted to spend some time with TVA and hire a consultant and look at the value proposition of TVA in the public power model in the back. And so we jointly with OMB hired Lazard, one of the best consulting companies in the world, to come in and evaluate this system. And so what their conclusion was the integrated nature, of which we talked a lot about already, and I'll cover more of that, the integrated nature of the transmission, the power generation with the local power companies, and the economic development processes and infrastructure, the natural resource and environment activities are so intertwined that they have provided 80 years of value and today are very relevant, and that you would erode value, particularly to the public if you tried to pull these pieces apart. And the key was that could TVA operate the plan that it had put together successfully. So what their conclusion is, this is the best model by far, if it's executed appropriately. And what they meant by that is we did what was in our plan. So that's where I'm going to start, is where are we in terms of executing that plan. But basically that plan, the key points are outlined here, was that there needed to be some base rate increases to be able to transform the generation fleet and to be able to pay down TVA's debt, to be able to provide for low rates for the long run. And that as long as TVA could generate internal efficiencies to mitigate some of that impact and keep our rates competitive, then this would be a successful model. And part of that was TVA reducing its operating costs by $500 million. That was the original plan. As well as looking for fuel savings and then lower interest that would come from lower debt. That was the basis for the plan, and not sacrifice reliability. So I want to talk about how we've been doing relative to that. This chart shows you in green, that was the original debt reduction plan that was resulting. And we started at about $28 billion and reducing that down to 21.8 by 2023 over the 10 years of the plan. The blue line shows you how we've been performing and tracking. And so we are favorable to that, meaning we have done better than what the original objective was. And I'll show you how we did that. And today, TVA's debt stands at $23.5 billion. So considerably lower than where we started. Before I get to the details of the driver of that, one of the impacts of that is we had said originally that this would result in lower debt and lower interest payments. And so this chart shows you the green line here, similar, this was the original plan for interest payments. If you look at the bars, that shows you what we've actually paid in interest relative to that original goal. And so in the first 5 years of the plan, we paid $1 billion less in interest expense. Because one, we were ahead of plan in reducing our debt, so our debt was low. The other was because interest rates have been low and we've been refinancing all the debt we could refinance at a lower interest rate. And then what you see for the second half of our plan is this continues. And so $900 million of projected lower interest expense over the second half of the plan. And I would say this couldn't come at a better time because now interest rates are beginning to rise again. And they've gone up quite a bit if you look at 2018. But we're paying less in interest expense because we've been able to reduce the debt. So while the rate's going up, we're now reducing the debt, and that means lower interest expense. And one of the biggest items in the bill that's paid, and I'll show you the details of this, is interest expense. And so this is directly driving our ability to be able to keep rates low, not just now, but out into the future. As that debt continues to come down, we continue to see lower interest expense. So this is one of the hallmarks of the plan, and so far we've been successful with that part of the plan. The other was generating operational efficiency, so making TVA as efficient an operation as it could be. And this O&M is really operations and maintenance. What does it cost to run the system? The staffs at the plants, corporate office, those types of expenditures, the maintenance on the facilities and the like. And so we had originally had a goal to reduce $500 million out of our operations. We actually exceeded that. And if you look over here, we were able to reduce $800 million. So we exceeded that by $300 million. Then the original plan said that once we had taken the 500 out, basically if we could hold our O&M to where it only increased at the rate of inflation going forward, then we would be successful. What we did was we took $800 million out. And then, I'll talk about these two items. Absent these two items, we have been able to offset inflation every year for 5 years now. And so what that means is that we had to generate in each of those years another $150 million of productivity. Because just salaries increase as our employees get wage increases each year. year, the cost of goods and services go up. So for us to keep this number flat, we had to take out $150 million productivity. We were able to do that. And so that's put us in a situation where we're operating better than what we had originally planned. In addition, in 2017, we took the opportunity, because we were doing better than planned, to make a $500 million contribution to our pension plan. And so the pension plan had more liabilities in it than it did assets. And so this was an opportunity for us to be able to de-risk our pension plan so that should we have a market downturn or some issues in the future, we would not have to come back and raise rates to be able to put money into the pension plan. So this de-risked the pension obligation going forward for us. And we felt that was a good use of funds. But if you look underneath this though, the key story here is the ability to offset inflation every single year after taking $800 million out. The other thing is, if you look, we took this money out by 2015. A lot of times what you have to be mindful of when people talk about cost savings is they cut costs, and then after they get them cut, the next several years the costs tend to creep back in, because they weren't done in a way that was sustainable. And so what you should take away from this, and what we take away is, now that we're 4 years later after taking the cost out and they have not come back, shows us that we did it in a responsible and a sustainable way. And that this will help in terms of, as we look forward, mitigating operational and maintenance expenditures increasing going along. And so, when you look at this type of stuff, one valid question that would come up is, okay, you took $800 million out, you've been able to offset inflation every year, okay, that sounds pretty good. That's 25% of our cost. Maybe it was too high to begin with. So how do you know you're really an efficient operation? Cutting costs is a good thing, but how do you know what good is? Well, in the utility industry, information about how much it costs to perform our operations is readily available. It's a very, what we call, benchmarked industry. And so what we do is we go out and look at what does it cost others that run nuclear plants to run nuclear plants, and who are the best from a cost perspective, to run coal plants, to run a financial services organization, an information technology organization. So we benchmark every one of the functional parts of TVA, and then we compare them to the best. And the color coding here is blue indicates that you're in the lowest 25%, being the lowest cost, so the best in the industry. And then this meaty, this is green to yellow, and fourth quartile is the highest. And so when we started, you can see we had some blue, we had some very efficient operations in TVA, and we had some not so efficient operations in TVA. And so what you would expect is we've taken out cost and offset inflation is we should have gotten better. And when you look at where we sit relative to 2020, with a couple of exceptions, we've driven every single functional organization to be the lowest cost. And so this gives us the assurance and the comfort that we actually are performing quite well, and not just quite well relative to our past, but quite well relative to what others people could do this for too. So it's a very efficient O&M organization, I would say. Next is fuel and purchase power. Almost 30% of what is in the bill that's paid is in fuel and purchase power. And when we put this plan together originally, we had hoped that we would see some efficiencies come out of the fuel purchase power, but we hadn't quantified it because we really weren't sure how much they would be. And we were quite surprised at what the organization and the employees of TVA, as well as the restructuring of our fleet, gave us in terms of fuel and purchase power savings. So this chart shows you where we started back here. So $3.8 billion went to fuel and purchase power when we started. And we were able, over the course of these 4 years, to take $1 billion out of our fuel and purchase power expense. The shading shows you where it came out, the specific type of fuel. So you'll notice this is coal, and coal was almost $2 billion back in 2014. and now it's under $1 billion because we shut down quite a number of coal plants. The other thing is nuclear, green. So nuclear's gone up, so we've brought on what's R2, and now we're going through the power upgrades at Browns Ferry. And so what you're seeing is that the value of that low fuel nuclear has greatly contributed to reducing our overall fuel expense. Because you take out something that cost $1 billion and you replace it with something that cost $100 million. You know, the order of magnitude I'm talking. And then we've added renewables, which is becoming, and Jeff talked about this, an increasingly valuable part of our portfolio. And so going forward, we would expect that to continue. And this is the ability to use solar to be able to provide for summer peaks on the hot summer afternoons, but then you have the capital investment, but you get essentially free fuel out of that. And then lastly, natural gas. You know, adding a plant like the Allen facility, the most efficient gas plant in the world, allows us to then take advantage of natural gas and reduce our fuel expense there. So this restructuring of the portfolio, that I'll talk more about in a minute, and the improvement of the operation of the plants that we have already. So our nuclear fleet, and this IMPO index is an industry rating for how well, think of it as how well do your nuclear plants run. And you can see we were back in the 70s, back when we started, and now we're up into the 90s. What that means is these nuclear plants run more, and you get the benefit of that fuel out of them. But we had to spend maintenance money to do that, but it was a good investment. So the restructuring of the fleet took away coal, added natural gas, added nuclear, as well as improving our existing fleet has allowed us to significantly improve the fuel cost out of the TVA. And as I said, we did that, we had to spend some capital to do this. And so as we get into the modeling, I'll talk a bit more about this, and something you should understand is that there's always a trade-off in the utility industry between large capital investments that result in operational efficiency or fuel savings and how those are going to materialize. And so in this case, we spent about $16 billion over the last 5 years on the restructuring of this fleet. And that included some of the things I mentioned, but we built 2 of these high-efficiency natural gas units. We finished what's R2. In addition, we invested significantly in our transmission infrastructure. And so TVA 5 years ago had a great transmission record and a great transmission asset. And today, it is significantly stronger than it was 5 years ago because we continue to invest in it because we understand the value of being able to integrate these resources, which I think somebody asked about earlier today, about how this grid supports all these operating plans. At this point, though, the big capital spending has kind of levelized at a steady state. And so we don't see any really significant large capital projects out in front of us. And that means that we're not facing a period where we would have to go out and build a lot of generators and add in this any of the debt back into it. And so this is kind of a sustainable capital picture for us going forward as well. And so then if you bring all the pieces of what I've just talked about in terms of our plan together and think about them relative to the rate that MLGW pays and all the other customers. This chart shows you all the items that go into the rate. And so TVA's rate for 2019 is 6.8 cents per kilowatt hour, and that generates $10.6 billion in revenue. And where does that money go? Where does the money that you pay TVA go? Well, it goes to fuel and purchase power. That's $2.8 billion. TVA's fuel cost, when I say top decile, is in the lowest 10% in the country. So we have the lowest fuel cost in the country of people running their fleets. Our O&M, I talked through that, is in the lowest 25% in the country. Our capital is, we spend on our capital, maintaining the plants we have, at an amount that's about the rate of depreciation of our plants. And that's typically the benchmark standard that most industries use for If you're putting as much capital into a plan as depreciating out, that's a good view that you are ensuring the reliability and not letting your assets degrade over time. And so we feel like we're investing for reliability within our capital spending. And then what's the last big component, almost a third of the rate, is the principal and interest. And so while we've spent $16 billion over the last, y'all getting the feedback too here. We've reduced our debt by $3 billion. And the debt reduction plan continues. And as that continues, that's what's gonna, the last element that we can work on to ensure that rates are low for the long term is to be able to continue to service the debt that we have and to drive it as low as it's feasible. So what we've been focused on is ensuring that you have low rates and you have high reliability. The way we do that is attacking every element that goes into the rate. And by doing that, this is the same chart as what Jeff showed you before, is that we've been able to hold rates flat while making all these investments and making this transformation, which we did not believe we would be able to do to start this. Typically you come in and say it's going to cost some money, but we think down the road there'll be this benefit. We're actually able to realize some of the benefits as we went through to be able to hold this rate flat. This goes out to 2021. And so it's not just that it's been flat through today, we expect this rate to be flat for the long term, which is what we're focused on. Providing rates as low as feasible is a part of the mission within the energy element. That's what we're really trying to do. Aside from this, overall rates, not just at the wholesale level, but this is at the residential and industrial. So this is a partnership with TVA and local power companies. What we need to make sure of and what we're committed to is that the ultimate end consumer gets the best value possible. And in partnership with the local power companies, what we provide in our rates and their rates, how competitive are they? And so what this chart shows you is at the residential level and at the industrial level. The top part is the region. So this is utilities around us. The bottom is the top utilities in the country. And so, and this is the average for all of TVA. What I'll tell you is residential rates in the valley are very competitive and almost in the top 25, lowest 25% in the country, and industrial rates are extremely competitive. And they would have to be. You cannot have the record economic development years that we've had and that we've talked about without having incredibly competitive industrial rates. And so we believe not just that TVA is doing its share in making rates as low as feasible for the long term, but also in partnership with local power companies having rates that are incredibly competitive as well. And here in particular at MLGW, your rates are significantly lower than this at the residential level. I mean, your rates are down here below 10%, 10 cents. So you have the lowest, most competitive residential rates in the country here within MLGW. And so I'll close out the financial track record and the success we've had by saying that we put together a plan. It was deemed by experts to be the best way to deliver value in the Tennessee Valley if we were able to execute on it. And we exceeded what our expectations were, taking $2 billion of cost out in that building, the most diverse fleet in the country. Spent $16 billion, reduced debt by $3 billion. And we think that we are in a situation now where we can provide low rates for the long term. So I'm going to change gears now and talk a bit about modeling, IRP modeling specifically, but maybe I'll just pause here and see if there's any question about TVA, TVA's financial track record, and what we've been focused on the elements that go into rates.
So I have a question. You talked about all of the savings and reliability of TVA. How does that trickle down to us in cost saving? I see your savings. How does that benefit us?
Well, MLGW's rate that is charged from TVA looks exactly like this from a trend perspective. So what it means is, as we raised money to build the assets like Allen and the nuclear plant expansion at Wells Fargo 2, and as we were paying down debt, we did not have to raise rates. We were offsetting that with these savings. So the blue line's going up. That's to pay for the capital. You know, that's to pay for the debt service. The light blue at the top is coming down to offset that. And so, as I said, what you would expect when you're going through a transformation of a fleet like we went through and spending $16 billion, you would expect rates to go up for a while and people would promise that down the road they would come back down. What we're telling you is we were able to offset all of that cost pressure and hold your rate flat, and now get in a situation over the long term where it'll stay flat because we can absorb these pressures. And for example, Jeff was talking about the ash work that we're doing around the ash ponds out of the Allen facility. Well, the ability to pay for those are included in our plan. So we don't have to come to you and say, yes, we're going to clean up the ash, but oh, by the way, your rate's going to have to go up for us to be able to do that. We've provided and allowed ourselves to have the flexibility to be able to do that.
And so as you continue with your savings, that flat line, will it even reduce more?
That is the potential. And that's what we're actually going through right now, is later this summer, we'll come out with our next long-range plan. So now we're doing a new long-range. So now we're almost at success here. You know, we're achieving our debt reduction. And as we look forward, we're going through all the machinations of that right now and running the modeling so that we can come out and tell you, here's what the next 10 years look like. And that's what we'll be finishing this summer. And so we'd love to, later on this year, when we're finished with that, come back and talk to you about, now what does the next 10 years look like? We're right in the middle of that right now.
Okay, thank you.
The $16 billion that you reinvested, what percentage was in the actual plants and the generation of power, and what percentage was invested elsewhere?
And so, the majority, you know, I mean, out of the 16 billion, probably 14 billion of that was directly tied to either transmission or to the generation assets themselves. I'm going off memory here, but kind of subject to check. I want to say that there's about 2 billion of that was directly tied to transmission investment, and then the rest was in plants.
If I'm reading this right, it's about $1 billion worth of purchase power, is that correct?
That's right, yep.
Who's your major supplier of that?
Yeah, so purchase power for us is really kind of 3 primary components, but 2 that really make up the lion's share of that. One is there are some natural gas plants that are inside the valley that we take the output from them. And so some of it's natural gas units that we purchase from somebody else. The other is wind contracts. We have about 1,500 megawatts of wind power that we get from up in the Illinois area that comes in to our system. And that's a rather sizable, that's probably almost $400 million a year for the wind.
Thinking about your hydro assets and just knowing the age, knowing that they're 80, 90 years old, some of them, I find your capital numbers a little strange. I thought you would have had higher capital numbers thinking about rehabbing all those hydro facilities over the next 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah, so we are in what we call hydro modernization period right now. So we are spending money on the hydro facilities. Specifically, we're going in and redoing the turbines. And when you redo the turbines, 2 things. One is that you improve the reliability of the turbine because these are really old turbines. The second thing is these new turbines are more efficient. So you actually end up with more hydro generation, taking advantage of the free fuel by that investment. What's probably surprising is what it takes from a money perspective to go in and rehab the turbine part of this relative to these others is not that sizable. And it's the kind of thing that you spread out over a 5 to 7 year period. So you don't try and do all of these projects all at once for a lot of different reasons, not just for money, but more importantly, lessons learned, ensuring you have the high quality workforce to do these things. So they're staged. But
John, and colleagues, if you return to page 28, this is my second time seeing this presentation. Back in March, my colleagues, Councilwoman Robinson and Councilman Morgan, we saw this presentation in Chattanooga. So on page 28. So I did this, took these notes back in March, and I did it again here. So if we start with this $10.6 billion, so we're adding this 1.8, 1.3, all of those add up to 10.6. So what had been represented to me by some of the outside parties saying that we can deliver things a little bit better, one of the things that they said to me was, okay, well, we can come to you, and we do not have the same amount of debt that TVA has, which, okay, I find that. So what I did here, so this debt service here, this interest and debt reduction. Now we also have this 6.8 cent per kilowatt hour. So all of these, this 10.6 equates to this 6.8 cent per kilowatt hour. If we take, so the debt expense, as he mentioned, was about 29.25% of this rate. So we talk about a pure, somebody coming in who has no debt. What we come up with is we take 70.75% of that 6.8. That comes out to 481. And so when I was in Chattanooga, I came up with this. And so people coming to me, I now have a figure in my head when they say, well, we can offer this to you at 3 cents, 3.5, 4.1. So now that's somebody coming in who doesn't have the same debt that TVA has. Now, as Mr. Young talked about, and that's just a flat rate. Now, keep in mind that our utility bill is electricity, gas, and water. The fact that the Memphis City Council has not raised its electric rate in about 12 years, except at one time, maybe 2 years ago, that's why the utility bill has been flat. Why it has gone down. At one point, what was it, maybe 2007, the price of natural gas was probably 3 times as high as it is right now before fracking and all of that stuff came about. So when we look at the true cost of our utility bill, it's pretty much from an electric side, it's been flat. Overall, it has gone down because the price of natural gas, of heating our homes, the price of natural gas has gone down. So when I'm looking at, we of course we'll have other presenters to come before us. What we have to then look at is that we got this cost of power. But when we talk about the transmission lines, and the only thing that I've envisioned about this whole thing, whether it's MISO or anybody else, we have these same lines going across the Mississippi River Bridge. What is it going to cost from an infrastructure? How do we translate that on top of this let's say they do come in at $3.50 per kilowatt hour. Once we add in the infrastructure costs, is that going to be 3, 4, 5, 6 cents that take us above this total 6.8 that TVA is delivering right now? So I just want to add that information.
So y'all have a big job in front of you in terms of these kinds of questions and understanding that people come and present things to you. So I think it's important to understand if somebody does come and say, we can spend billions of dollars of capital and never ask you to pay for it or get a return on it. Just be careful if that's the assumption that is made. That's good. Any other questions? I'll move to which will get into this issue about capital, heating, fuel, and other operating expenses. Well, that's what you get in an IRP. What you get is a comprehensive look at that.
So O&M rates have declined and fixed costs have declined. So why are wholesale rates stay flat from Shay's presentation? You know, people pay bills, not rates.
So we pay for the capital and we pay for the debt. So So the service on the debt and the service on the capital, we were able to offset that with the savings. So those numbers went down, and the paying the debt down, and the paying the capital to build the plants, because you have to build the plants to take advantage of the fuel savings, is that money went to pay for those. And we did it in a way where we didn't have to raise rates to spend $16 billion, and we didn't have to raise rates at all. But we used internal savings to fund this. It's a different way of saying it. Instead of coming and saying, we will ratepayers and customers pay us this money in advance, and then we promise you savings down the road to offset that and be even better. We said we need to find a way to fund this ourselves. And so that's what we did.
Question about the cost of solar and implementation of solar. Looking at the Lazard studies, the cost of solar on a kilowatt-hour basis is really the lowest. The levelized cost of energy is actually less than the operating cost of coal, which says to me you should shut down all your coal plants and move to maximum solar as quickly as you can. Of course, you know, there's the time of day consideration and nighttime, and so you're going to have to pay for storage as well when you implement a lot of solar. But the cost of storage is coming down rapidly. That should be a significant part of your plan. And one other element of that is that your pricing structure, you're moving to more and more of it as a base rate, which makes it harder and harder for small entities, small businesses, and households to justify implementing solar on their own rooftop. And you've made it very hard for some folks to work with your pricing structure. So two things: more solar, and how can you adjust your pricing to make it really more useful for small households? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So one of the things that y'all are going to get deep into, and I'm glad about the modeling section now, is an understanding of what matters is not just the levelized cost of something over its life. It's somewhat irrelevant from a comparison perspective. What matters is when do those resources generate electricity versus when you need resources for electricity. And in an IRP process, you go through and do that determination. And what is true is the most cost-effective resource for providing for peaking in the summer today is solar. And if all you had to worry about was a summer peak, and that's all a coal plant did, you would shut down your coal and you would add solar. The reality is, at 7 o'clock in the morning on January 3rd, there is no solar available. And your system, our system, is peaking. And that coal plant is the only thing that's keeping the reliability running. And so, if it were just an isolated 1 hour, 1 day, but what you do in an IRP is you look at what the consumption of electricity is every hour of every day for 20 years. And what that means then is you have to make some forecast, and you'll have to do this. We just did this. You'll have to look out 20 years, look at every hour, look of every day. It's a significant amount of data. And then you're going to have to say, what's going to change over that 20 years? And how is the consumption during the hours it's low at night and it comes up in the morning and back down? How is that going to change over the 20 years? Because it's not just going to go up or down. Actually, these hours are going to change. And that's what you have to model. And then you come in and you say, what's the most cost-effective resource, mix of resources to meet that? And you need some that run 24 hours a day, low-cost things. That's what nuclear plants do, and that's what coal plants do, big coal plants. And they meet this kind of what people refer to as baseload. So they're running all the time. They cost a lot of capital, but their fuel is really, really cheap. And when you start doing the economics of that, they pay for themselves because of the fuel savings offsets the capital investment. Well, guess what? The thing that needs to turn on in the afternoon instantaneously as the temperature rises traditionally has been gas plants, like peaking gas plants, not these combined cycles like we just built. And so what happens with them? They're really low capital cost. They're high fuel cost, but you're only going to run them a few hours. And so the capital savings more than offsets the high fuel cost. And then you have things that are in the middle that kind of follow these. Today, for these people, where you just need to serve the fact that on a summer afternoon, that's going to be higher in the future, solar is exactly the answer. But it won't replace these baseload coal plants to be able to reliably provide electricity. Having that whole mix is what's helpful. And what is especially helpful is when you can do it with scale. So TVA has 36,000 megawatts. So we can add and subtract increments to that. You know, we can, as the peaks and load changes, we have shown we can shut down some, potentially even more, add solar and other resources. If you only have 2 plants, you have no flexibility because you need the 2 plants. You can't take one down because you need both. And so scale is an important part. I'm kind of walking through what we're getting into, which is great. These are the attributes you're going to have to worry about and consider that we do. And we do this when we do an IRP, and we do it when we do power supply planning every single day. And the math underneath this matters. You take in all the capital cost of these plants, all the operating, all the fuel. You look at their characteristics, and you look at the load you have to serve and how it's going to change, and you do modeling to determine what's the cheapest things I could put in to be able to serve this. And that's what we do. And that's why we have the system that we have today, is because we've done that. We've done that through our history, and that's how we ended up with this diverse fleet that you see on the left. This diversity provides risk mitigation, but it was the most economical for serving these nuclear coal plants that are operating at night. When we need them 100%, these gas plants that go up and down during the middle of the days, hydro that's there, and then now you're seeing solar. So now solar's cheap. I think Jeff mentioned we've added a considerable amount of solar here recently. IRP is calling for significantly more solar in the future because it is very economical. Good news for you is that TVA waited until the price of solar was cheap and economical from a modeling perspective before we started adding. Because we could have added solar 3 years ago at $50 or $60. Instead, we're adding it at $30. And why did we do that? We did that because we run this modeling, and the only thing we're going to add to the system is something that's going to be able to make your rates as low as feasible. And so we're just trying to make good decisions because ultimately we realize that you have to pay for the decisions we make. But this is, these assumptions, I started walking through some of them, and this is what you're going to have to look at and understand is the level and shape of load, 24 hours a day for 20 years. That's going to be behind this because you're making investments one way or another for the long term. The resources, they're all different. How much capital, how much fuel, how much O&M, which ones operate the right way. So there's operating characteristics that will be reviewed as well because not all plants can just go up and down as the temperature changes. Some can, some can't. But you have to know that. Then the market, you can utilize markets as well. The TVA does that. I mean, you have the benefit with TVA of that this is the TVA region. You have our resources that are providing for all of your electricity. And Jeff said this, these are the surrounding markets. So these are all market participants. And every single hour that they have electricity that's cheaper, we buy it. Like you don't have to go to MISO and join them to get their low prices. You get it from TVA. We go buy it. We buy it for you. It passes through. And so we do this today. Now, what I'll say is what we know today is these percentages represent how often these markets are cheaper than we are. When it is, we buy. But what it says is they're not cheaper very often. Because we built this very balanced portfolio and we intentionally built it to be the cheapest cost by picking the assets that fit the load we had to serve. Reliability. I know there was a question about risk and reliability earlier. I forget somebody was asking. Here's the thing about reliability is we do modeling and planning for reliability, and you'll have to talk about that and get into that when you're looking at the IRP. And the way we look at that is we say, what's the probability that one of our resources will not be there when you need it? I think JT was talking about that when he was giving an analogy. And so what we do is we determine how much extra we have to have. And what we determine is today we need 12% more in case weather is volatile or one of our plants doesn't operate to be able to provide it. This is done statistically to ensure that we do what's called a 1 in 10 year event. We can ensure that there won't be one event in 10 years of plants not operating that would cause us a reliability problem in terms of delivery. We do it mathematically. Well, it's 12% because TVA has 36,000 megawatts, and we can afford to have a couple of plants go down. The extra we have to have on a percentage basis is not that high, at 12%. If you had 2 plants, or 3, let's say, it'd take 3 natural gas plants if you just did capacity to generate 3,000 megawatts of load. Well, what happens if one of those plants goes down? You have to have a backup. So you would have to have 30%. You have to have another third in your reserve margin. Not ours, we only need 12%. We got a big fleet. The smaller your fleet, the bigger your reserve margin. Well, guess what? What's it gonna cost? A lot to have an extra third sitting there. Not doing anything, just waiting for something not to operate. And so we do this. And so what you get out of this is you'll have to get into this. You'll have to understand what level of risk you're willing to wear. You also have to understand what's the cost. And you will be able to mathematically determine how much that would cost. But it'll be a lot, I'll just say. That's why economies of scale. The value of 154 is 154 can lean on a big system, you know, and 3,000, 4,000 megawatts on our system is nothing. It'd be a lot on a local power company. Volatility, and so the diversity of this is if you take a few plants to try and serve load, you don't have much diversity. You get a fleet like ours, you get all the diversity. And we show the diversity in terms of how much is made up of nuclear, how much is made up of coal, gas, but what we don't show is underneath that. There's another layer of diversity because we have multiple types of gas plants, peakers and combined cycles. We have multiple kinds of coal plants, small units and big units. And so the advantage of diversity comes with dealing with scale as well, and that has a real financial value. And then lastly, I'll just say flexibility in terms of a dynamic portfolio. We can take resources out and we can add new resources as those needs change. It's hard when you have a limited amount of resources that are being able to provide that. And then tenor. And so commitments that people make for their own generation, let's say, are 30-year commitments that they wear themselves. What TVA does is we make commitments on your behalf for 30 years, and then we wear the risk of that, and it's shared among 154 people. And so I just ask you, as you think through and you're looking at your different proposals, always be mindful of within this, what's the risk premium for that you have made a bet that you have to support locally for 30 years versus you have the benefit of 154 supporting something, and it's a much smaller percentage of the overall financial risk that's out there. Because IRPs are ultimately about risk, you know, and how do you share that risk, how do you optimize that risk. And so we start with low cost and we build and do the lowest cost decisions, and right behind that we're focused on risk. And then right behind that we're focused on how does it meet our environmental standards. And so just fast forward, so a few of the outcomes and how do we look at this relative to the IRP we just completed. And so these are the highlights for you. And so again, we looked over 20 years, and what does our IRP tell us we should do? What's the best thing for the future? Is add solar. In some scenarios, almost 9 gigawatts of solar. That's a tremendous amount of solar. But there will be more solar in the valley because it's the right thing, and it's the most economical thing, and it's the most environmentally friendly thing. So it fits all the checks. Battery storage. Guess what? The ability to begin to address utilizing solar with batteries so you can use the storage capability to meet the off-peak when the sun's not shining. Those are becoming more vital. I will tell you though, battery storage, the economics of it is still a ways off. But the IRP says if you have the right conditions and the costs come down like solar did, it would be a wise investment. The key, like solar, is don't go buy when it's high. If it really is coming down, today it's not economical, it will be. When it is, we'll do it. Because that'll reduce the overall cost for everybody, and that's what our motivations are. And then it says in certain scenarios, if your winter peak grows and storage isn't there yet, then adding some natural gas would make sense. And all of this results in, we've had an over 50% reduction in carbon overall. This says that the numbers trend towards about 70% reduction. And so this clearly meets the right, even though it's done from a least cost perspective, a byproduct is, because of low cost, environmentally friendly resources today, is it's much more environmentally friendly. And so those are kind of the key takeaways from IRP. This is my last slide on the modeling part of this. Is at the end of this, you have to evaluate how are you doing and how does this perform relative to what you want? What are your priorities? And so for us, we come up with a scorecard. And so what is it that we care about? Then we go do all this work and come back at the end and say, what's going to be the best thing? And we do it in two ways. One is we look at these things, and you'll have to look at these things called scenarios. What if the world changes? We have a view of what the world will look like tomorrow. What if we're wrong? And so we call them scenarios. We look at 5 different things that could totally change in the future, and how would these decisions we make today, would we regret them if the world ended up in some different place? And then, how is it you go about running your business? You can make decisions differently. I said we do least cost. You know, we start there, and then we look at how it impacts the other things. And so that's what drives us, because we want to keep your rates as low as feasible. Actually, we're legally required to do that. And so in the end, we come back, and this is the output of our IRP that says across, whether you're looking at cost in terms of what would effectively be rates or total capital, CO2, land use, which is becoming more important, and flexibility. Because with distributed energy resources, you need more flexible resources today than you've ever had. And across what the current outlook of 5 different views of the world, what this says is the way we do this least cost planning today inside TVA and the modeling we just did produces the best outcome across the entire range of what we were trying to accomplish, which is a low cost, reliable, environmental friendly food.
Sir, I want to go back up on 2 points. With the I have to go through all my files. I see very little evidence for it. I don't want you to tell MLGW wrong. You are not buying that much power from me, sir. And then your 2019 IRP draft, you all were talking, because I read that thing. It's long. It was 17 to 24%. And I even got my PowerPoint that I made in 2015 on that type of generation. Who I did a community meeting. My other question is, you know, don't mislead us about how much power generation you're getting. It will be, you know, just be open and transparent. I just can't find it, but you can send it to me if you can find it, and I can't find it. And then, why the change from you saying your base, you have to keep 12%, you really don't have to keep 12%. And your IRP draft said you were projected 17 to 24%. Why the big change in such a short period of time?
So, 2 things. I'll answer the second one because I may need help with what the first one was. But on the second one, when you look at reserve margins, you have to look at them relative to time period within the year. And so we're a summer peaking system, meaning the highest peak. So we typically talk about our reserve margins relative to the summer. But there actually is a calculation for a winter reserve margin. And it's a different math, not a different math, but it's a different outcome. And so you have to have more reserves in the winter than you do the summer. The biggest thing underneath that and why is in the summer, once you get saturation of heat and all the air conditioning running, the temperature can go up, but you can't have more load because there's just nothing else that can come on and serve to drive cool. In the winter, it doesn't work that way. In the winter, as the temperature gets lower and lower, more heating plug-ins and things can be added, and so you don't see a kind of curtailment. And so what that means is in the winter when you're serving a peak, you're going to have even more resources than you would in the summer. And so the difference is just a range between when you talk about summer and when you talk about winter.
Yes, sir, we saw that in 2014 when our utility bills went up to $1,000. Y'all remember that? We went to buy extra gas. And so,
I would say to that point though, if a larger component of the bill was fixed, then you wouldn't see those rates go that high when you had these really cold temperatures.
see, again, people say bills not rates. See, this is the thing that I just want you to make clear that this is totally different from that exhaustive material that I read before. And I just want to point out the weakness of your argument, and I'd like some little proof of that you all buy more than you all say, because I just can't find a record of it. Trying to do the best for the people from Memphis. Because I just don't see where you're buying it.
John, I have a question. This may be more so for the engineers versus the CFO, but we live right next to the mighty Mississippi. Looking at a hydro perspective, is there any way to tame the mighty Mississippi and harness its power?
I'd say that is outside my depth.
That's a good question. We like this question.
I can actually answer that question. On two previous occasions since I've been here at the Port Commission, we've had teams look at utilizing the river as a source for energy converting to electricity. Actually, the University of Memphis Engineering Department worked with one of those entities. And what they found out was that, as you know, the Mississippi River, because of its fluctuations, rise and fall, during flood periods, it also moves a lot of trees, things that are the size of houses that act like battering rams. So they couldn't find an efficient way to actually convert that cost into a usable platform. It has been tried twice, but the Mississippi River is it can be a beast at times. And difficult to work with. So.
Thank you.
And we will get you the details. We'll show you exactly where the amount of solar that would be added into what scenarios. Those numbers are within the document. We'll get them.
I was in Washington, D.C. Last year, and had a convention with the Department of Energy. And a guy came, and he had all kinds of innovative solar power design models. Technology is constantly changing. And you're talking about 20 years and waiting on the cost of batteries to come down. That's too long. The cost of the batteries will be down in the next 3 years. I'm pretty adamant about it because of the resources and the investments in it and all of the information that's going on. So I think we really need to spend a lot of time and energy and efforts in the solar avenue in Memphis, Tennessee. We're saying, well, yeah, you get it. The solar generated in Memphis, Tennessee can be sold back to TVA. Isn't that correct? That's right. So that's a win-win for us. We get sun power for at least 12 hours. In the wintertime, we get it for 6 to 8 hours. So we're still producing solar energy in January. So I think more interest needs to be applied to that. This city is a valuable source of energy, not just the Mississippi. So that needs to be considered in depth. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. And I didn't mean to imply it's going to take 20 years for batteries. I believe batteries in a reasonable amount of time will be cost effective. They're not today, but they will be. Not 20 years.
Right.
And that's what our RFP shows, is that you would add solar, you'd add batteries, and that'd be over the course of this period.
I understand that Southeast Australia used to have serious energy reliability problems, and they installed a major Tesla battery system just a year ago, and their reliability's gone way up. Everybody's extremely happy about it, and other districts and regions of Australia are now looking at doing the same thing. So they made a commitment to new technologies, and it's been a major plus for them. We should see the same thing here.
Thanks for allowing me the time to come speak to you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, on that last point, I agree with you. I mean, I think energy is always got to be local because, just like this isn't where I last was in Canada, this is not Australia. So what our challenge is, we should be looking at every one of these technologies, solar, storage, wind. I think we'll see another set of resources, demand response resources, energy efficiency as a focus. Our responsibility at TVA is to use every single one of these tools. The balance we have to make sure is when we do that, we are an early mover, but we don't move until the cost doesn't burden our customers. Because when you move too early in those technologies, you burden the customers with the cost, and you're burdening the people who can least afford it. And so we have to be really conscious of this. And so my approach is that we will move early to understand the technologies, really get a sense of the cost, see how they can be levered here in the Tennessee Valley and in Memphis. And if they are the lowest cost, we are going to do them. There's no philosophical commitment to coal or nuclear or anything else. The commitment is energy at the lowest feasible cost, stewardship of the environment, and economic development for the people. So in that regard, my job is very, very simple. Those are the priorities. Well, I'll wrap up, but I'd like to leave you with a few points. But before I do, I just wanted to offer you one last opportunity. If there's anything John talked about or I talked about, or we didn't talk about that you want to make sure we understand or we need to respond to, I'll just stop for a minute and invite you to ask it now.
I do have one more. There was, when John was presenting about the future capital investments, I would just ask that some of those, where feasible, some of those capital investments take place in Memphis and in Shelby County.
I understand, and that would be a focus, I agree. By the way, on your earlier point, these investments that we've made in the TVA system, and as we retire that debt, are really things that set us up to be very, very cost competitive over the long term. And one of the things that TVA doesn't build into its rates, that you'll see in others, is we don't have investors, which typically ask for a 12% return or so. This is, so as our debt service comes down, there is no investor return that flows back in to occupy that space. Other questions?
Is that investment return, is that reflected in the PIR report? As part of the look at capital
Can't hear your question.
Thank you. One of the points that was brought up just now was the fact that, TVA is not a stock company. So you don't have to have a certain amount of your total capital go back to paying dividends to the stockholders that support the company. A number of electric companies are stock-supported companies. Will the investigation, the PIR, is that consideration part of the capital view when you look at what the cost would be of having other types of energy come in from other sources?
You mean when we purchase the cost system?
No, I'm saying when, I guess it's more a question for JP. Will there be a separate study that shows that allocation of capital that would go out to stock payers as part of what we're going to see? When somebody comes in and says, we can do this with no capital cost at company X, but they're paying 12%, is that cost actually a part of that total?
So one of the things I think I can speak to, and Jeff and I both have worked in the IOU world where we did have the return on equity component criteria. What's that?
Investment.
Yeah, IOU, Investron, I'm sorry, thank you, Investron Utility. And so what I would suggest is that as we go through the modeling and we start doing comparisons and we start thinking about what's optimal, right? I'm not sure that we specifically would necessarily say what's the return this company is asking. What I'd be concerned about is what's going to be our ultimate cost over the long term. What are our customers going to, and if an investor-owned company can show you or show us a way to do that and do it with lower costs over the long term than we otherwise thought, then that's got to be considered, right? Because what you're trying to do is come out, remember we talked about that least cost versus the lowest cost. So we're going to want to consider all of that. So I don't know that we would, I wouldn't personally rule out an investor-owned entity based on that unless I could see that entity, be it investor-owned or not, wasn't competitive in the arena that we said we needed for this community. So that's, to me, the way I would look at it. That's your point.
Well, I think what I'm trying to do is say that I'm concerned that if we get company X that comes in here and says, we can give you this 3 kilowatt hour price instead of 6, what we're getting right now. Are they showing us in that cost their return to their investors?
Yeah.
As part of that equation.
I get it. So we would have to, again, it would be prudent, right, in our due diligence to drill down into whatever entity, and we're going to get into this a little bit in the next session when we talk about some of the proposals that we've seen. But it would be prudent, I would believe, to drill down into their offer, anyone's offer, to just figure out what's really behind all of this. Because before this is getting ahead of our board and certainly the council, but before I would even be comfortable taking anything past me, I'd want to be certain that we're not going to run the risk of what you're alluding to down the road, that we've got some entity that's saying that we're not really clear about the premiums or however they're pricing their cost to us. So I want to be sure about that before I go forward. And so we would, my point is, I don't think that we would rule out anything until we are certain, until we have an indication that it's not ultimately going to be in the best long-term interest of the community and our customers. And that's really the undergirding principle.
Thank you. Well, just in closing, I'd make four quick points. The first is, when you think about any alternative you're going to consider, TVA, someone else, my advice to you would be very careful, very diligent to understand all of the assumptions and the scope and the risk any proposal that lands before you. Because that is where the real decision making is. And when you do that, think about it not just with a year or a 5-year perspective. Think about it with a 20-year perspective, because you're launching on a path that really is that duration. And just an example I would give you is, to your earlier point, I don't know, but likely if somebody says to you, we can provide you 3-cent kilowatt hour, I could give you a similar number to that from TVA. That is an energy price. Okay? So you're paying for the energy. That's not enough, because you need to pay for the capacity, which is the reliability. You need to pay for the fuel that's not embedded. You need to pay for delivery of that product through transmission to your delivery point. Those are all elements of the price. And so I think what you'll see over time is people like to quote you an energy price. Make sure you're getting the whole price picture, because you have to buy all of those, and in addition, operating services that are a little more technical even so. So be careful. If somebody says 3-cent energy, the question is, does that include capacity? Does it include fuel? Is it delivered to our delivery point? Does it include operating services? And how long are you willing to commit to that price? These are all really important questions. You'll work through these. And then the last element of that is think about the risk once you understand that. What fuel's backstanding this? What does it do if the price of gas doubles? What does it do if there's a $20 a ton price on carbon? These are the sorts of things you have to ask yourself. And JT and these staff understand this. So that's a point I would leave you with. With TVA, we have, the advantage we have here is we have a robust delivery system. We have a diverse fuel mix. We already made the capital investments necessary to live this for a decade. We've taken a lot of the fuel price volatility out of it. In a real sense, what you all have been a part of over the last decade positions TVA to deliver a decade or more worth of really solid service. So that's the first point I make. And as you think about these assumptions, scope and risk, there are other assumptions. You may get a proposal that assumes TVA's price is going to go up at 2% a year as a way to calculate the delta. And what I'm trying to convey is I don't see that. We see a decade worth of flat prices. Of course, things can happen here that might affect that. But I think we're pretty well positioned. And we'll do this very open book together. The second point I would leave you with is that TVA is committed to Memphis and been our customer for 80 years, been a critical part of this Valley public power line, which again, I view as a strategic advantage for this region over the next few decades. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't be here. And so I think you should consider that, and I want you to know that TVA is committed to Memphis. And I actually had a reporter ask me on the break, well, you know, Jeff, you're out here and you're talking to this. Why are you taking this posture, this tone with Memphis? And my initial response was, this is the only tone I have. I don't have another tone. This is what public power should be about. And we're not here. We're not here because you're thinking of leaving our system. We're here because we should be here helping you. But I do see that we haven't always done our best for you. And so we're here more because you told us we're not meeting the expectations. And so that's something you should know we're committed to. Is committed to meeting your expectations, having a better relationship over the long term. And the third thing I leave with you is just that when it comes to any issue, particularly the disposition of the Allen site in the long term, we're going to do the right thing. We're going to make it transparent. We're going to listen to your feedback. And I hope if we're partners in the long term, we'll have opportunities to take that site and turn it into something special from an economic point of view. So the last point I would leave you with is, as you go through this process, one of the things John tried to do is go over the challenge you're going to have to do this assessment so that you kind of see what your task is from somebody who does this. We do this for a living. We plan our system and make this decision every day when we dispatch the fleet, and our IRP process is one of the best in the industry. So we understand this. The last point I leave with you is if you need help while you're going through this, we're here to help you. You know, we have a vested interest. I want you to be our customer. I'm not glossing over that at all. But we legitimately want you to make the decision that you are happy with, that you understand, that if we can help you objectively as you go through this, you have my commitment. We will do that. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to meeting you out here as I spend time in Memphis. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff and team. Frank, I'm going to ask you, do you want to go ahead and do your part, then I'll wrap up?
Just real quick, if you could, PSAT members and guests, if you have a name tag, leave that with us. We'd like to recycle those. The next meeting will be held January. The next meeting will be held June 6th at the Benjamin Hook Library. Will be the next meeting location. And you'll get communication with that. That meeting starts at 10 o'clock, and I think the next meeting is from 10 to 2. But again, you'll get that communications.
So, thank you again for being here. Let me just say this too. Thanks again to the TVA team. I want to make sure that we convey this point. I know today may have, to some, may have appeared like it's a TVA sales pitch. Okay, I'm just going to say it that way. And that's really not what today was about. Really today was more about educating all of us on our current state situation with regards to how we get the power that we receive. And I think they did a good job of helping us to understand that. And that's going to be critical as we move forward, because as we get more input from you and make decisions, it's really important for us to all understand the current state. As we anticipate anything different than that, we really need to have a good baseline. And so that's why we wanted to start last time with just some basics, and then today talk about how we get what we get. Let me talk for a quick minute about the next meeting on June the 6th. Frank said that's our next meeting. So the primary focus of that meeting will be to review the studies that we've talked about. Everybody knows that we've received a few studies, proposals from entities. Now that we are armed with some of the information that we've heard in this meeting and the last meeting, I think as we talk about those studies, you will be able to go through it a little bit better with this baseline knowledge, so that we can have a better conversation around the pros and cons associated with those studies. And so I want y'all to be aware of that. Going forward a little bit from there, I want everybody to be aware that after the June 6th meeting, we are anticipating that we will have the Integrated Resource Plan consultant on board sometime in the July timeframe. So for planning purposes, although right now we don't have an exact date, we would anticipate our fourth meeting after the June 6th meeting, that our fourth meeting would be somewhere in the last couple of weeks of July. And I don't have anything more narrow than that yet, but the plan would be sometime in the latter part of July. We will skip August and have no meetings in August, and then we'll have a September, October, and November. So that's kind of the thought process now. We'll get more information after we get some more information. We'll certainly have it by the June 6th meeting, hopefully a little bit better idea on when that will be. Yes, ma'am, Sandra.
We have short list
Well, tomorrow, Alonzo's not here, but Frank, we'll have they're due back tomorrow, right? So the responses to the request for proposals due tomorrow. So we'll have that. So when we meet, certainly when we meet at the next meeting, we'll have more information on who those would be. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
And while you're planning the July meeting, don't forget, I'm still participating in the IRP process with PGA.
Yes, ma'am. We know there is there. So there. Okay. So it is. I don't know what the dates are, but we'll figure it out. Because Dana's involved in that as well, so we'll have to make sure. So again, hopefully this was helpful today. And again, there's the TVA folks are going to be here if you have any additional questions. And again, thank you so much for your engagement and your questions. Here's what I want to encourage you all in, because I heard it around the table today. I heard some healthy, what I call healthy skepticism. And I want to encourage you to continue with that, because that's really what we want to have as we go through this process. Ask questions, challenge the conventional thinking, stretch us, make us think outside of the box. And that's so that we make sure we have the best result at the end of the day for our community and for our customers. So again, thank you all for being here. Be safe on your way home. Again, thanks. Take care.